Welcome to The World Deciphered, brought to you by Decipher Brief. I'm your host, Iya Meormishvili. Nearly 2.5 years into a war that started with Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, Kyiv stunned the world on August 6th with its own incursion into the Kursk and Belgorod regions of Russia. Some 2 weeks later, it is clear that what started as a highly secretive military operation was not just a flyby in the night. In fact, Ukraine's military leader, Colonel General Oleksandr Syrskiy, reports that his troops successfully seized dozens of settlements and more than 1,000 square kilometers of the land, and are now setting up an administrative military office in the occupied areas of Kursk. In this episode of The World Deciphered, we're talking with retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who served as a commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe, about Kyiv's bold move into Russia and whether or not Ukrainian military can hold the land it's taken. Later in the program, we're getting a Ukrainian perspective on what's happening and what it all could mean. The perspective will come from Ukraine's former Minister of Defense, Andrei Zagorodnyuk. First, though, you might not know that the Decipher Brief produces a daily open source report on what's happening in the world. It is modeled on the brief that intelligence analysts use to keep the President of the United States up to date on what's happening in the world of national and global security. The Decipher Brief COO Brett Christian joins us now for a look at other stories that were topping the brief this week. Brett?
Hi, it's great to see you. It's been an incredibly dynamic week around the world of national security. Obviously, the story we can't take our eyes off is what's happening in Ukraine, but I want to share with you a few other headlines that are dominating the world of national security as well this week. In Europe, the Biden administration is weighing a pivotal decision that could reshape the battlefield in Ukraine. The U.S. is considering sending long-range joint air-to-surface standoff missiles to Kyiv. If approved, these advanced weapons would give Ukraine's F-16s the capability to strike targets over 200 miles away. That would be a significant boost to their military power and a capability that only a handful of other nations have. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal is out with a shocking revelation in the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage case. In a story headlined, "A Drunken Evening, a Rented Yacht, the Real Story of the Nord Stream Pipeline Sabotage," the Wall Street Journal depicts how a small group of Ukrainian military officers and private businessmen allegedly carried out the 2022 attack on the Nord Stream pipeline using a rented yacht. The operation was initially backed, but then later reportedly called off by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and has further strained relations between Kyiv and Berlin. With the energy crisis in Europe deepening, this incident could make diplomacy between Ukraine and Germany pretty uncomfortable, to say the least. And in health news, Sweden has reported its first case of Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox. Now, this is the first case outside of Africa. A person who had been recently infected reportedly traveled from Africa, where the World Health Organization has declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. Experts are now warning of a potential global spread. Swedish authorities, in coordination with the WHO, are on high alert. Though Sweden's advanced healthcare system is expected to handle the situation effectively, this case serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing threat posed by infectious diseases in a highly connected world. Yeah, those were just a few of the stories topping the Decipher Brief's open source report this week, and we'll no doubt have a lot more to talk about next week.
Thanks, Brett. Let's remind everyone that if you'd like to sign up for access to the Daily Brief, you can do so by becoming a subscriber plus member at decipherbrief.com. It was perhaps one of the best kept secrets in the world when thousands of Ukrainian troops marched into Russia on August 6th. Here's Decipher Brief's managing editor, Tom Nagorski, with the story.
It began with an early morning attack that no one saw coming. Hundreds of Ukrainian forces crossed into Russia, capturing a border town in an unprecedented invasion of Russian territory. Less than 2 weeks later, the Ukrainians have taken more than 2,000 prisoners and roughly 400 square miles of Russia's Kursk region. The local governor has ordered the evacuation of more than 200,000 residents. The Kremlin has scrambled its troops and its propaganda machine, and it has vowed revenge against both Ukraine and the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin said, "The enemy will certainly get the response he deserves." It's a stunning turn of events, not only the first time Ukrainian forces have launched such an invasion, but the first time any state-backed army has invaded Russia since World War II. Analysts said the mission may have many goals: to give Ukraine leverage in any future negotiations with Russia, to divert Russian forces from the Ukraine front, and to give the Russians a dose of their own medicine. As Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said, Russia brought war to others. Now it is coming home. The invasion has also shifted morale on both sides. Russians in Kursk complained that their government had failed to secure the border and was now failing to help them. And Ukrainian soldiers posted a video from the captured border town with a simple message: this town is now controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine. In the days ahead, those Ukrainian forces will face questions. Can they hold their ground and capture even more territory? Will Russian reinforcements and airstrikes drive them out? And, perhaps most important, how will the Kursk invasion change the war? I'm Tom Nagorski for The World Deciphered.
The World Deciphered spoke with retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe. Though he's based in Germany, he's currently traveling to the United States on what he describes as a civic duty to speak with fellow Americans during this pre-election period about the importance of Europe and European security to America's national security. We caught up with him in Pennsylvania to discuss the military aspects of the Kursk incursion and hear his thoughts about how this operation might continue. General Hodges, thank you very much for joining us today and welcome to The World Deciphered. We see these headlines, which are just unbelievable, unimaginable, even 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago. Ukraine invades Russia, or Ukraine attacks Russia, or Ukrainian incursion into Russia. How significant is it in your view?
So we don't know, and we're not entitled to know exactly what the objective of this is. In fact, we're all kind of struggling with what to call it. Is it a raid? Is it an incursion? Is it an offensive? But that's okay. We're not entitled to know what the Ukrainians are trying to accomplish. They've done a masterful job of concealing the buildup, and I think that they will have done a lot of work to prepare for this without the Russians or us really knowing what they were doing. But it is not too early to make some assessments about effects. Number one, clearly, this has changed the narrative about the inevitability of Russia winning, that there's no way that Ukraine can win somehow. They have, I think, changed that narrative, at least for now. They've also, I think, debunked the idea that because Russia has drones, that it's the end of land warfare, it's the end of combined arms operations, and that it would be impossible to conceal the buildup of forces. Obviously, the Ukrainians have figured out how to do it. I think probably with an innovative approach to creating a counter-drone bubble somehow. The Russian response has been ragged, and there's been some panic. The fact that they have put the FSB in charge instead of the military tells me that they don't trust their generals still, and also this does feed the Kremlin narrative that Ukraine's attack is a terrorist operation, and therefore they're leaving it to the FSB to kind of solve it, which I think will be a mess because the FSB is not organized to do that. So these are some of the things that I've seen so far.
What can happen next? Where does this go from here?
Well, the interesting thing for me will be how long do they plan to stay there? And that goes to why did they do it? Is it just to draw off Russian forces from other places? Is it to create political dilemma for Putin? Is it to was it intended to preempt a Russian buildup for another attack on Sumy, for example? It has denied Russia the use of this area from which they had launched a lot of drone attacks in the past. And it also enables Ukraine to get closer to some Russian airfields where they could strike with their own weapons. Mm-hmm. So Now, there are several advantages to what they have done. They've captured hundreds of Russian troops and created some real turmoil inside Russia, which I think will have longer term implications for the Kremlin. The best news is, for me, is the absence of any U.S. government calls for, slowing down, restraint. Hopefully, our government will continue to be quiet on this.
You mentioned that it will have long-term implications for the Kremlin. What does this mean for Russia and for President Putin himself, in your view?
Well, of course, there will be a lot of work. There is a lot of work being done in the Kremlin to try and gain control of the narrative about what happened. And I think we're going to see a lot of people dropping leaks, blaming who was responsible for the failure. Was it the Rosguardia? Was it the FSB? Was it the Army? Such an intelligence failure. How did this happen? So I think there will be a lot of blaming going on. In the meanwhile, I think that Putin will have to assure the Russian people, and maybe more importantly, all of his oligarchs, that he has the situation under control. I don't think that the Russian military is in a position to do anything more than what they're already doing, which is launching attacks against and killing innocent Ukrainian civilians, attacking infrastructure. So the ability to move a lot of forces around to react to this, that's very difficult. I mean, you're talking about huge distances. The logistical network, the command and control that's been a problem all along. So how quickly they can react with quality effect, I think it's going to be several more days before they are able to really start challenging the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians are obviously, at least I don't think, are on their way to Moscow or something like that. They're creating an area, and I would imagine that they're going to build up fortifications against the inevitable Russian counterattack, and to bring in enough logistics for them to continue to do this until they're satisfied that they've accomplished all they can or all they want.
What do you think about the tactics that the Ukrainians used as a military officer? Was this something that is expected, or I understand that we did not know about it, but in the military warfare, would you plan for something like that if it was you? What do you think about the exit strategy? That could be, I'm sure that's a concern for them because they're sending some of the best troops into Russia. They need to get out.
So I think three things here. First, I have seen reports that Gerasimov and the general staff were receiving intelligence that the Ukrainians were planning something, but they ignored it, didn't believe it. And this is usually how these big surprises happen. I mean, every time the United States has been surprised, going back to Pearl Harbor or Tet, Battle of the Bulge in the Second World War, we were getting intelligence, but we didn't believe it because it didn't fit the mindset, what we thought. And that's usually how this happens. And I think this is what happened here. The Ukrainians found a place on the border that you had confused command and control, weak forces. The Russians clearly not expecting to be attacked. And the Ukrainians had the discipline to not let this leak out in any kind of a meaningful way. That's the first thing. The second thing that impressed me about their attack is the way that they have been able to prevent effective use of drones by the Russians. I think they've created some sort of a bubble through counter drone non-kinetic means to reduce or degrade the effectiveness of Russia's drones, and that's how they've been able to go in so far without losing a lot of forces. And then the third thing is here we are today as day 8 of this attack, and they seem to have the logistics required, fuel, ammunition, maintenance. But I think also they knew they were probably going to go to an area where they would be able to capture some of these things that they might need Although what's been featured, we've seen German tanks, German mortar, German provided equipment, I should say. So that means they had to bring along the maintenance they needed for those. That's impressive to me.
Since you're based in Germany, that's something that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said, that he never wanted to see German tanks in Russia, and now they are in Russia. So, this is my final question to you. What do you think it means for European security, and how the Europeans perceive this war?
Well, of course, these are not German tanks; these are Ukrainian tanks. I take the point that they were German manufactured, provided by Germany, just like American equipment or British equipment. But once it's handed over, these are Ukrainian armored vehicles. I think our European allies are watching closely, as are we. Russia's ability to react, what their vulnerabilities are. I hope that we are learning how the Ukrainians are operating in this electronic warfare environment, countering Russian drones. But the fact is, you still need disciplined, trained women and men in your armed forces to be able to do these things. This is not a digital game. These are real people operating in tough conditions. So I hope that all of our European allies are thinking about capabilities, but also the need to have quality women and men in your formations that are able to operate in these conditions.
Mm-hmm. General Hodges, thank you very much, as always. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for the privilege here.
Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges shared with us his insights into the military aspects of Ukraine's operation in Kursk. And now we turn to the Ukrainian perspective and speak with Andriy Zagorodnyuk, the former Minister of Defense of Ukraine. We spoke with him in Kyiv just moments after another air raid siren had stopped. He shed some light on the possible motivations and goals behind this incursion. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, especially given everything that's happening in Kyiv.
Right. Thank you for inviting.
The headlines are that Ukrainian incursion into Russia, Ukrainian offensive, or Ukraine invades Russia, all kinds of different headlines that just catch everybody's attention. So how significant do you think this all is from the Ukrainian perspective?
It is very significant because the only way for us to win, whatever the political definition of victory is, I'm not going there now, but whatever the way for us to win is to do something outside of the box, is to do something which is not according to the book. Because according to the book, Ukrainian and Russian army would fight very similarly, and then the resources difference would kick in, and that's what happens with pretty much all symmetrical wars. So we need to fight asymmetrically, and that doesn't mean, traditional asymmetries which have been studied in the West, like in insurgencies and all that sort of stuff. But it's like doing something which they don't expect, doing something different, doing something creative, something not written in Russian books of war, and something which people would ask what it is. And that's one of the things. So first of all, it's attacking Russia itself, and of course they didn't expect that. So from kind of operational perspective, that's something shocking to them, because it looks like they didn't expect that at all, and they didn't have proper reserves and so on. So it's not just Ukraine dared to do that. It's not just like Ukraine calculated that the border would not be protected and it would go into Russia relatively easy. It's also Ukraine calculated that Russia don't have sufficient reserves to immediately put it. And then it also has calculated that Russians would be very reluctant to move troops out and bring them. Also, what we didn't expect is that Russian special forces, like elite forces as they call themselves, like Ahmad from Chechnya, would actually run away. I mean, that was, to be honest, something new. But what is interesting doing outside of the box is that people still try to define that. That's not the raid. That's not the occupation. That's not obviously annexation. It's not occupation to hold forever. So there's still misunderstanding what exactly that is. And for us, it's good because it's sort of Russians also don't understand. They also wonder what it is. And of course,
I do want to ask you about
sure.
that.
Yeah, please.
The Ukrainian government has been, and rightfully so probably, has been very quiet and reserved about sharing information about the operation. So in your assessment, how do you see the end goal of this operation?
Well, if we qualify that as a raid, I mean, it may end up not during a long time. It may last not for a long time. And if we manage to divert the forces from the key operational areas, it still would be a success. And even part of the forces, if they're diverted, if Russia is failing in Ukraine because it has to deal with this raid, that would be fine. But if there are options, most likely it's more than the raid, because obviously raids don't include digging trenches and so on. So that's something different. However, it still may end up with being a temporary case. I believe that one of the reasons why Ukrainian government, particularly military leadership, are not disclosing the end game is because disclosing the end game would work against the end game, and so they want to keep this ambiguity. I'm not sure how to call it, some operational ambiguity, for example. We can call it, in order to kind of make Russians sort of wonder what exactly is going to happen. But it might be safe to assume that several options might be on the table, like scenarios, and depending where that goes. And ultimate scenario, potentially, maybe, that these territories hold until the political settlement.
So use it as some sort of bargaining chip.
It wouldn't be phrased like that, because phrasing it like that would immediately kind of, demote the whole purpose. But the thing is that if Russia cannot protect its own territory, certainly it will be much weaker in whatever the political process will be. Whatever, because we cannot map out what's going to happen, because this is extremely this war is very unreasonable, at least from the Russian side, because Putin is fixated on Ukraine, and that fixation seems like it's beyond the reasonable limit. He's already losing over 600, well, close to 600,000 people of casualties, enormous losses, economical. He's, half of his economy is a war economy, so he's already obviously invested into this more than probably more than anyone thinking reasonable in his place would do. And of course, he's unreasonable to start that from the beginning, but at least at that time there was a understanding that he was planning for a kind of easier outcome, easier war. But it's not easy for them,
And much quicker too. Yeah.
Yeah, and also their gains are incremental. They're small. They're regular, but they are quite very small, and many of those gains don't have any strategic effect. At the same time, he's losing in the maritime domain completely, and so on. So politically, this war haven't brought him any gains at all so far, because even the cities which he kind of conquered are still not going to be any decisive, and they're not going to bring any justification of what he has done, and he's facing trials for the war crimes. So now, question is, how the process will look in the future? It's completely unclear, because again, there's no reasonable fair game here. It's just something, when we deal with a person who doesn't know what exactly now how to get out of this, and at the same time how to save the face and all those kind of things. But whatever's going to happen, if it happens politically, his situation will look much weaker now.
Let me ask you more about what's happening in Kursk. Particularly, there is a major gas pipeline that Russia uses to send about 50% of its gas to Europe. that's going through Ukraine. And also there is, of course, the Kursk nuclear power plant. Now, there are some theories that those two strategic objects or strategic assets could be something that Ukraine would like to take over and maybe use it to either divert the electricity back to Ukraine as Russia is going after Ukrainian electricity grid, or cut off gas, gas flow in the pipeline. Can you shed some light on that? Where do we stand? What's the goal of Ukraine as it relates to those two infrastructures?
I don't think any goals there, because first of all, that gas pipeline is going then, like from Kursk, it actually gets to Ukraine. So if we wanted to do something with it, we would just cut it in Ukraine rather than going to Kursk. I mean, we don't need to go to Kursk to cut that. But the other thing is that on a power plant, I don't think Ukraine has any appetite for dangerous nuclear games. We've been telling the whole world about nuclear security. We've been talking about nuclear security at peace forums, at all kinds of platforms. That nuclear stations, power plants, are not like jokes. They're not toys. I mean, you can't play with them. It's a serious thing, which may end up with severe consequences. So I'm not sure that we are. I don't know, because it's up to military command. But I would be. I can't even imagine that Ukrainian military command are heading to keep a nuclear plant as a hostage, to be honest.
This was a big surprise to me to hear that in the first week of this operation, Ukraine took more territory from Russia than Russia took in the past year from Ukraine. Yeah, what does that mean, and where does it go?
There are, again, as we discussed, there are multiple scenarios. So, but generally speaking, Russia will have to eventually address that problem properly, and they will have to send troops there. And that inevitably means that they would be failing in Ukrainian front, because they don't have additional troops, at least in a like foreseeable future. So essentially, I think that they will have to be bringing troops to there, and it may end that raid ends up with Ukraine moving out, but at the same time, Russia will fail in other fronts. If that happens, that's already a success, and I think that that could be very well the original endgame, or at least one scenario. So we'll see. We'll see to that, but there are, like, of course, it's a dangerous operation. There are risks, and but honestly speaking, doing nothing was even more risky.
And this is my final question. You, in your former capacity as the defense minister of Ukraine, you've dealt with, of course, your partners, Europeans, Americans, NATO partners. What do you think the impact of this Kursk events or incursion will be on their attitude towards Ukraine?
We don't see negative response. We see some analysts being very pessimistic about that, but otherwise the reaction was positive, and people were reacting in a positive way, because nobody wants Ukraine to lose in the West. I mean, because there's been a huge investment, but more importantly, people understand the strategic meaning of this war. They understand the strategic meaning of why it's important that Russia loses and why it's important that Ukraine wins. Again, whatever's political definition of victory, we're not getting there now. But it's just like overall, it needs to be must not be a success for Russia. So when they see something happening with again, asymmetric, something happening, bringing out of the box solutions, people who supported Ukraine, they react positively. Obviously, we'll see how it goes in the future, and of course, we're quite surprised with Russia, with the United States government's response, because U.S. government's response wasn't negative. It was actually supportive, and we see the latest president's comment on this and so on. Because people looking for the answer, they're looking how this war can be can be won, and they don't want to see Putin's gaining.
This was wonderful. Thank you very much for taking the time and answering our questions. And good luck to you. Thank you for watching this week's episode of The World Deciphered. I'm Iya Meurmishvili. Be sure to join us again next week for more of the deep insights and expert analysis that you have come to expect from the Cipher Brief. And visit us at decipherbrief.com, where you can subscribe to our open source report, keeping you up to date on what's happening in the world every Monday through Friday. And remember, national security is everyone's business. We'll see you next week.